Says Facebook is not streaming. Why? Facebook is complaining about something. Just remove the destination from the stream. Hold on, Facebook's having trouble. See if that works. Awesome. Okay. Facebook is now live. I think we're live on YouTube now as well. We should be streaming on X. And Devin, your podcast is streaming. Looks good. Awesome. Awesome. All right. I'll give it maybe a minute and let folks come on, and then we'll get going.
I can't believe y'all have a Redditor on here, and I'm streaming on Facebook and Twitter. I refuse to call it X. It's still Twitter, you know.
You guys got to make it where we can stream on Reddit, and then it's over with for you.
So we actually used to have streaming on Reddit. There's this thing called Reddit Public Access Network.
Oh.
Essentially, part of it is just that the community just wasn't really actually embracing it, and part of that is just because of the nature of Reddit. Reddit is part of the reason what makes Reddit so great is that it's about your ideas, not what you look like, and these kind of things. And so things that kind of expose people personally, Redditors kind of shy away from. But things that actually allow you to actually share like deep, dark secrets, man, Redditors are all about that. Love talking about all the drama in their life and just sharing every single personal aspect of it.
Oh my goodness. No wonder. That's good intel, because I was curious. I'm like, usually these apps, they try and adapt each other's tools. Like, when Clubhouse started doing the audio, here come Facebook with their audio rooms. And, so I actually thought about that. I'm like, how come Reddit doesn't have like a live feature? So cool.
I mean, it takes away some of the magic of Reddit, right? And honestly, one of Reddit's big competitive advantages is our privacy. It's an interesting thing with Reddit. Reddit is similar to Google in this very, very interesting aspect. And Google is almost a singular thing on the web for this. Google and Reddit are not as valuable if you're not honest with them. So, for example, if you're like, hey, I want a new car, or this is my budget. If you don't tell Google that, Google is not going to give you good results. So Google's not useful to you, right?
That's true.
And the same thing with Reddit. Now, if you're doing the whole Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook BS, it's all about trying to sell an image of you as opposed to you actually getting value necessarily from the platform itself. So
I'm learning some things here.
I know there's a certain amount of anonymity that comes with using Reddit. So I think that's why a lot of people embrace it for sure. All right. I'm not really sure where Kirk Tramble is. He's supposed to be joining us, but he'll probably check in a little bit later. If not, we got Devon Price on from Microsoft. He's a TPM. And then we have Steve from Reddit. He is a CISO from Reddit. And my name is L.E. Nichols, LaShawna E. Nichols. Some of you know me as, especially if you're on Facebook in our Facebook group. We have to use our government name, but so this is we're basically going to be talking about cybersecurity. We've been talking a lot inside of our group about Kirk's here. He's here.
Yes,
You made it.
I'm sorry. It was anyway.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
It's all good.
Came in fly with the bow tie though.
I know.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I feel so bad. Like all of y'all are actually looking nice and professional, and like somebody might actually hire you and employ you. And I'm just showing up my regular dirtbag self, man. Like, but it is a clean hoodie. The hoodie is clean, so at least we have that going on. So,
hey, listen, Flea, you're the CISO here. You can come dress however you want.
Awesome. Kirk Tramble joined us, and I'm gonna get into the bios, but I first wanted to at least talk about what Black WPT is. So Black WPT we're a network of Black tech professionals. I created it in 2013. My goal was to network and connect with other Black professionals in the field, working in the job, especially working in Silicon Valley. I'd never really seen a lot of us, in the job. So I figured I'll create an online network. And so we started as a Facebook group. We go live pretty often. I usually bring friends of mine in, and we do live chats, conversations, and anything that will help our career professionals get better at what they do. So that's us, blackwpt.com, and I am going to get going with some bios. So we got Fredrick Lee, Flea, we have Devon Price, and we have Kirk Tramble. Kirk, you put your bio in there. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to start with our cybersecurity professionals, start with our TPM, Devon Price. So Devon Price is a transformative leader in technology and information security with a passion for driving high-impact collaborative programs that fortify organizations against security risk. With over 9 years of experience in the field, he holds a master's degree in management information systems and certifications like CISSP and CAPM. Devin has contributed to both startups and large corporations specializing in information security, vulnerability management, and project management, excuse me. Recognized in the cybersecurity community, his insights have been featured in notable publications, and he was a finalist in the Cybersecurity 40 Under 40 for 2022. As a member of Forbes Black Community and the LinkedIn Top Community for Information Security Voice, Devin also hosts the Talking Tech podcast, fostering tech and cyber conversations and highlighting industrial innovators. Thanks for joining us, Devin.
Glad to be here.
All right. And then we have Fredrick Lee. So Flea has been a Redditor for over 12 years. And prior to Reddit, Flea spent more than 20 years leading global information security and privacy efforts at large financial services companies and technology startups. Most recently, as Gusto's Chief Security Officer and Head of IT, he previously held senior security privacy roles at Bank of America, NetSuite, Twilio, and Square. Flea is a proud Southerner. Flea is a proud Southerner and raised in Mississippi and holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the University of Oklahoma. Welcome, Flea.
Thank you for having me. And also, Devin, I'm mad at you, man. I didn't know that this is going to be an event where we allow like millennials and Gen Z here. I'm unapologetically Gen X. Don't forget about us.
No
We're
problem.
Still here.
I respect it.
Awesome. And then last but not least, we got Kirk Tramble. So Kirk Tramble is a seasoned cybersecurity strategist. He boasts over 20 years of experience with tech giants like Chevron, Oracle, and Apple, and as a founder of Kizata LLC. As president of the Cal Alumni Association, he represents the over 500,000 UC Berkeley alumni globally. Wow. An MBA graduate from Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business, Kirk combines his expertise in cybersecurity and blockchain technology to protect SMEs. Kirk is passionate about mentoring and education, actively contributing to the tech community through webinars, podcasts, and industry conferences. Kirk's mission is to advance cybersecurity practices, blockchain understanding, and leadership in tech landscape. Awesome. Welcome, Kirk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Excellent. All right. So I put when I created the event, I put out a call for questions. Because we currently host 2 check-ins. We host 2 check-ins that allow tech professionals to come in and ask questions. They basically talk to each other. And sometimes during those check-ins that we do every bi-weekly, they'll have questions surrounding cybersecurity. So we realized that this was a really, really big topic, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to get a group of you guys together, especially at your capacity in different areas of cybersecurity and sort of bring you together and answer some of those questions that were coming up. So I will start. And please, if you're listening, if you have questions, you can drop a question in the comment section, whether you're on YouTube, on our Twitter, our X, or in the Facebook group, and we'll be able to answer questions later on. All right, so I'm gonna start with Flea. A lot of people hear of the title CISO, CISO.
Yep.
Can you explain exactly what that is? What do you do, and sort of what does a day-to-day look like for you? Really briefly.
That is a great question, and no, I cannot explain what a CISO is, and I'll explain why I can't explain what a CISO is. I can't explain what a CISO is because it actually varies by company. But I can tell you some of the things that actually are really common when it comes to actually CISOs. One is, in spite of what you actually believe, that C title, I'm just a junior executive. And it's actually useful for you to actually know that, because sometimes I actually see the C title and like, oh, well, this is somebody who can shut the entire company down or has $1 billion budget. It's actually not the reality. There are some things that actually are changing and shifting towards that. And when you think about my previous role, that actually was a true kind of like senior actual executive. And the reason for that is that role is essentially me as the CISO also being the CIO. Now, CIO has traditionally actually been more at that table with the rest of the execs, and you're actually seeing a shift in the industry there. But actually, come back to your fundamental question. The way I normally try to explain this to people is, if a CISO is doing their job well, and if the company's defined the role well, the CISO's job is helping the company understand, identify, and navigate risk, right? And one of the things you will not hear me say is that the CISO's job is to actually control risk. That is never a thing for a CISO. And in fact, if a CISO says that their job is to prevent risk, fire that CISO, because that CISO is hurting the company. Companies cannot be successful if they are not taking on risk. And fundamentally, that is what a company truly is. It is a large-scale risk decision machine. And that's really what is actually happening at those executive levels. You're actually identifying opportunities. And that's actually the great thing about risk. You're saying like, hey, there's risk here, but there's actually some kind of reward. And it's actually balancing all those risks across the board to understand where you actually want to make investments, what are the smart risks to take, and how do you actually accelerate the business via taking risks. And that's a good CISO, is somebody who actually understands those things and understands that really what they're doing is helping the company actually navigate that. Part of the second job of a CISO, people probably actually heard, the CISO title of the chief scapegoat officer, because, hey, we constantly see people getting fired and getting blamed. Hey, there's Equifax, there's Joe Sullivan for Uber, the stuff actually was happening with Okta. But if you want to say that the S stands for something else, it actually stands for salesperson. One of the most important things that a CISO does is sell security and security culture inside the company, but they also sell security outside the company. And when you can actually have a good CISO, once again, it is such a phenomenal kind of like business enabler. So for example, I used to work at this fintech company called Square. It's now called Block or whatever. But one of the that was part of my role was saying, hey, there's this thing called PCI. PCI is stupid, and y'all don't know nearly enough about technology to actually judge us. So my job had to be, hey, going to the PCI Council and educating and selling them on how we're actually doing security, and in particular, we're actually also trying to actually push the boundaries on security. And I know that actually felt like a lot, but really it just all boils down to your ability to understand, identify, manage, and communicate about risk in business.
Got it. There's a certain level of strategy necessary for that role.
Yeah. And obviously, there's a huge portion of that as well. I kind of assume that that's actually somewhat of a given, but that's also part of the thing. Is like part of your job as a CISO is actually figure out what that strategy is for your company and what's the right strategy for your company. Like one of the missteps that I see, not just CISOs, but a lot of security practitioners do, is actually just follow the advice that somebody else did. Right? It's like, hey, here's what Apple did. I love Apple. I'm like a big, huge Apple fanboy. But Apple does not have the same business risk or the same threat landscape that Reddit does. And so our security program has to look different than what Apple's is, right? Now, at Square, my security model looked very similar to Apple because we made software and hardware. And so there are a lot of things that are worth learning. And even with that, though, we had to actually think about things that are a little bit different, because it turns out Apple has, a couple of $1 trillion where we had little dollars. And so that also influenced what our security strategy should be like. So thank you. Thank you for calling me out there to make sure that also I should talk about the strategy aspect as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That was
well said.
Yeah, that was well said. There's a gray area for a lot of folks when they see that title. They're like, okay, who is this person? Is he leading the security efforts? That was actually really, really good. And I never thought about it in terms of like sales. You having to be internal and external.
Now, the role can look really different, right? Like, and I know people with the title of CISO that they're like, if they're an analyst, that would be a compliment to them, because some of them actually just have the title for a checkbox exercise reason, or like, hey, you're the only person that we have in any kind of technical function. So we heard something about firewall once. You're now our CISO, and so it is useful to also just think about what that means. One of the things I get asked a lot is like, hey, how do I become a CISO? And I actively tell people not to, because it is the kind of job that is, one, it's not for everybody. I think some people think that being a CISO is like, hey, you're an exec, you're going to get all this money. The reality is, at least in Silicon Valley, you will make more money as an IC in security. Like, I regularly pay my ICs what a lot of people would just call crazy, stupid money. But the analogy that I've given to other people, and I'm going to date myself here, is I'm more like Phil Jackson. My job is completely different. I'm the coach and I'm building the team. And that's a very different thing than actually being on the court, actually playing. And basketball players make more than basketball coaches. Now, not all basketball players, and obviously basketball coaches do okay as well. But it is worth it for people actually thinking about this, or thinking about this role, or even examining how other people are navigating their career, to also recognize what it means to be a CISO, because it's a thankless job. It can be an extraordinarily stressful job. And in some cases, as a CISO, you're literally dealing with lives. And so, like, even a small example, as a CISO during COVID, it was my job to make the determination about whether or not the office is going to be closed or open, which literally has, health implications to people. Me saying, hey, you need to be in the office, or no, you need to stay at home. And that's a level of stress that is not for everybody. And
I mean, when we said we were talking about security, I never really thought about it like that. Like, that didn't cross my mind. Like COVID, like COVID security. I'm like, okay.
Oh yeah. It's a larger thing. And if you just want to be able to actually sleep at night, if you just want like a 9 to 5 type job or whatever, CISO is not the job for you. Okay. And if you're doing it because you want money, there are far better and far easier ways to make money, and to make more money than that. So it really is something that, if you're interested in it, I encourage people to do it because you're passionate about security, not because you're chasing dollars. You're going to make way more money and Wall Street, being a hedge fund trader, et cetera. You're going to make way more money being an IC at one of these new AI companies, or an IC that's actually doing hardware at a company like Apple or Facebook or Square, than you'll ever make being a CISO.
I mean, I have so many questions surrounding just the title alone, and like, how does a company? I'm not going to ask it, but what was chiming in my head when you were talking was like, how does a company know that they need a CISO? Like, I can imagine.
Most companies don't. I regularly talk to startups, and even like larger tech companies are like, hey, please help me find a CISO. Once you are a CISO, and I'm like, look, y'all's biggest risk is that you're going to fail because you don't have enough money, you don't have enough customers. You need to spend that money on hiring more engineers and more people that are actually building things, not on a CISO or something like that. And so most of the times when I say, hey, those big triggering points are going to be, one, just the general size of the company. Like at a certain point, it's just necessary to just have somebody who can fully own that function. And the delegation and distribution doesn't work as well at that point. The other is that there are regulations that are also required of you. And that's also where you can oftentimes end up in those scenarios where you kind of have a CISO and you're looking at them sideways. You're like, hey, wait a second, you just graduated and now you're the CISO. Because oftentimes it's like, hey, I run a local, community bank, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And as a community bank, you have to have somebody who owns security. Or hey, I run a small healthcare practice. And because of HIPAA regulations and some of the other regulations, you have to have some senior executive level or executive decision-making level person in that role. So,
and then Fleet, correct me if I'm wrong. I've also seen some other companies, they have a virtual CISO or a fractional CISO.
God, I hate that. There are companies that do that. And part of the reason why I don't like it is I don't think it's valuable. And I think most companies are just burning dollars with that. And the reason why it's not valuable is part of what makes a CISO effective is that the CISO knows all of the business, right? And you have to actually know something about the business and the nuance, and not just about operationally or the strategy, but even the people internally. And as a virtual CISO, all you can do is
how can you do that?
Yeah, you can't do that, right? And you can just drop in, give some high-level guidance. But the other downside of virtual CISOs is they never have to actually own a decision. And that can also end up giving you bad advice, right? So
True.
One of my hobbies, yes, I'm old, broken, and fat, but one of my hobbies is powerlifting. Now, I can give you all kinds of great recommendations for exercise that you can do if you're trying to actually take your squat from 400 to 450 or 500, etc. But if you're a beginner, I'm going to kill you. Now, as somebody who's just giving you advice on the internet or a magazine, go with God. Be blessed. Go for it. But as somebody who would actually care about you, like if I'm a teammate of yours and we're like saying, hey, look, we got games coming up. I need you to actually have this performance on the 40, etc. I have invested in you. I know something about you, and I'm going to make sure that my advice doesn't harm you. And I have to own that advice I gave you, because as a team member, if your performance is bad because of my advice, it also impacts me. And that's something you actually don't get from a virtual CISO. What you can get from a virtual CISO is a very large bill. And that's about the best thing you will get from them.
All right. You know what? Let me get Kirk in here, because I'm looking at him. He's like, hold on, man. Hold on. Kirk, get in here, please.
What you got, Kirk?
Well, so I think all of those points are well taken. And I love basketball. I try to play 3 times a week. So the Phil Jackson reference, I really resonate with.
That was a great one.
Yeah. I think what we're hearing is there are so many different size organizations. I started my career with Chevron, and it was 60,000 people, I think, and I've worked in different places. I think Flea and I shared NetSuite. And NetSuite was 1 minute, it was a startup, and now it's with Oracle that maybe boasts 200,000 people. So each of these organizations have different profiles, and as was pointed out, different stages of growth, right? So I think, when you think about strategy, the question is, what is the objective? So if it's basketball, your strategy is to win. But of course it's to win, but you've got to look at who you have. So if you have Kobe and Shaq, you got one strategy. And if you don't have those folks, you have another. So the first thing we do, and most of us, probably everyone on this call, is we have to identify, well, what's the objective? And I think that Apple is such a great example, because the way that they market based on secrets. So that's part of their go-to-market strategy. We don't know what the Vision Pro looks like. Boom, we all know. If the rumors are not out there, you can get fired for sharing that. That's probably not true at every company to that extent. So, but if the objective in that case is to control all information during development, then you have to take a much different approach than, say, a company is saying, well, we're a nonprofit, but our finances maybe aren't our biggest risk, but our reputation is, and so we need to do things. So I think that's the first thing. Strategy is identifying, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And then you start with assessment. So all strategy is, you got to gather some data and figure out, where do you sit? And I think that when you talk about cybersecurity, one of the great tools is some type of assessment. That assessment can come from interviews. It's going to happen. It needs to happen. And for us to do really good security, we got to find out, as Flea mentioned, if you don't understand the business and the business processes, all you can do is kind of general stuff. But at the end of the day, I think the key is understanding from the business, what is your most critical business processes and the data. And now the compliance, right? what are your compliance requirements? I mean, there's all kinds of requirements. I think if you have the data on a French citizen, the data must live in France. You know, there's all kinds of rules, and they can cost you a lot of money. I was part of a company that was breached, and the effective chief security officer, really, his title was just security director. You know, I think he was very embarrassed by the event, and subsequently left because of the pressure. But the observation, I think, is maybe all companies will be breached. And maybe the other way to look at it is this is a learning opportunity. Stay in the game. I don't think the company was holding him so much accountable, but I think he felt that pressure. And it was, I mean, it's no fun to go through the post breach. I would say it was a 6-month nasty process, but not bad in the sense of it probably is the growth area we all need, you know, to go through a breach and understand all the different facets. And then that helps adjust the company's culture and willingness to listen to the voices that are saying, hey, we got to change our culture. We need to do this. We need to do awareness training. So I think that's a kind of a value add to the conversation, that it's not a question of will we be breached. It's when.
Yep.
And how do we react? And so strategy wise, I think you're thinking about, okay, so if someone, you know, let's use the house analogy. If someone breaks into my patio, can I have another layer that's going to lock them in and slow them down? But I shouldn't just think, oh, they're either in or out. That's probably not feasible in the world we're in today. And I think as you start to create strategy, it's these layers, of course, protecting the most valuable assets. And frankly, data, personal data can be very, 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 very valuable reputationally. So I think the other ad I'd say is that organizations should think about not only the financial data, but also the reputational data, because that could be as devastating, you know. And we all recall probably when Sony was hacked and released the movie product ahead of, you know, that's got to be a very, very difficult process to go through, to be on the IT team, find out, you know. But again, you use these as learnings to say, hey, this is why we have to dot our I's and cross our T's in terms of process.
I love that you also talk about that reputational risk, and in particular, even bringing up the Sony incident, because, you know, one of the things that happened was those people that were in the middle of that, essentially that chain of control, their reputation was diminished, and now nobody actually wants to use them, and that essentially makes them out of business in Hollywood.
Correct.
And when you look at how Netflix then responded after they saw that Sony had caused a change in other companies. And Kirk, I love one of the things that you mentioned about that previous director, because I think this is one of those things that we sometimes don't talk about in cybersecurity. That one, you should expect to get breached, right? And the thing that I think we often miss out on talking about professionally is a large part of our game is that resiliency strategy. How are we resilient when this happens? So it's not necessarily about, hey, did you get punched? It's about like, hey, how quickly did you get up after getting punched? And now are you going to be stronger the next time that same person comes to punch you?
Yeah. What is it? Everyone has a game. Was it the Mike Tyson quote? Everybody has a game plan before you get punched in the mouth. And just going back to what Kirk has said, you know, obviously prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. And in this industry, no one bats 1,000. It's honestly like baseball. If you can bat 300, you're a good hitter in baseball. And cybersecurity is kind of like that. Of no one goes undefeated forever.
It's an impossible goal, right? It's the classic impossible goal of a defender. And our job is we have to be right every single time. An attacker only has to be right once, right? And so the odds are just stacked against us. And so we should expect there are going to be some things that happen. But if people kind of follow, you know, Kirk's mentality of like multiple layers and you know, defense and depth, et cetera, then it's a much different situation.
I love that. I love it. I want to ask you, well, go ahead, Devin, but I want to ask you a question about the program management that you do. Go ahead and make your point, though.
Sure. No, just to go off of what Flea was saying, going back to that reputational hit is if you are doing kind of those defense in depth, that layered security. When that incident does, happen and you report it, most people, your reputation may not take as much of a hit if there's documented process of, hey, we tried different things with the patio and we tried to make it difficult. The average, consumer or user, they're not happy, but it's like, okay, well, they tried versus like there was no attempt here.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right, great. I wanted to ask you, because before we jump in, there's a lot more questions, but I wanted to ask you, Devin, you're a technical program manager. And that is when you think of cybersecurity, you definitely don't think of program manager. So what do you do, and sort of how does that apply to Microsoft?
So ultimately, with kind of going off of what Flea is saying, at the CISO level, you're kind of the top level security person within your organization. You are ultimately in charge of that information security program for the organization. But obviously, no one can do it alone, and you need help. And so from a program management perspective, within cybersecurity, let's just say you have a company, there are multiple programs you have to have within your information security program. You'd have to have a vulnerability management program. You'd have to have, just an asset inventory program of just what are all the assets that Kirk said that are critical assets that we need to protect. And so you have to deputize so many people to oversee the overall security of an organization. What I do specifically at Microsoft is I'm a program manager for our vulnerability management program. And that's just making sure that any reported vulnerability to Microsoft that we get from either an external researcher or we find out from Twitter or somewhere else, however we find out about that vulnerability, that it's assessed, it's reviewed, it's put into a case. We have our engineering team provide a fix, and that it's sent out within a timely fashion within either a monthly security update, or it's just sent out as a fix that doesn't require any customer action. That's a process that I help manage on a day-to-day basis with a number of other team members at Microsoft. So it really is, taking the basketball analogy, it really is a team effort. You need 10 other individuals out on that floor that Phil Jackson is coaching up. You all have to work together as a team to make it to get that win.
I love that. Love it. And I want to give Kirk a chance to talk about the strategic and the strategy work that you do with organizations. You want to take a few minutes and just maybe sum up sort of what you do and what you got going on?
Yes. And, again, Reddit versus Microsoft, it's probably hard to understand the breadth of these organizations and the depth and the influence. Both of them are top in the industry, and congratulations to Reddit on recently going public. That's a great thing. So, I think one of the things you do then is you look at, all right, where are you today? It's kind of like, as Flea mentioned, squatting. I can't imagine getting under a bar with 400 pounds on it. And so I can't. And you don't want to start trying to squat 400 pounds. And so, one of the things you have to do is every organization has the ability to change. Like, there's this ability that it can accept change. I try to figure out how rapid can an org change, and then what's a reasonable goal. So you really want to figure out from a cybersecurity perspective, where are they? So I'm going to guesstimate that Microsoft is a very mature cybersecurity organization. They've been training people, they have processes, they have all this stuff. So they're already at a high level, and then they're going to move to another higher level. Possibly Reddit, maybe because it's more of an internet kind of history. I don't know the history of Reddit, but it maybe there's culture shifts that Flea is leading to get to maturity for people to realize this is really important. Smaller orgs, they're even more challenged because they're focused on whatever is in front of them to do business. And it's hard to make money. It's hard for the business people say, this is going to make me some money. But you have to then figure out, okay, what's achievable? So maybe it's awareness training. Maybe we say, listen, let's secure your devices. Let's agree that all of the only company work is done on company machines. These are givens in other organizations that are not givens in smaller orgs. I'll go back to, and I'm gonna keep this company anonymous, but the breach I was referring to happened through a product called GitHub. It probably was before Devin's company bought it, but it was a personal account that was breached because the company had a very engineering mindset and didn't require the developers to do what corporate should do. And I was brought in over the corporate side, so I didn't really have a lot of span and control. But had they utilized single sign-on or SSO, the kind of enterprise edition of GitHub, it prevented that vector. So a very simple and maybe even penny wise, pound foolish. So it's a little bit cheaper to use this. And I see the heads nodding because some of this isn't particularly complex. It's if a service provider has a level of service, and yes, they're going to charge a premium for it, all things being equal, it may be worth that investment on the security side because it really is that value. So, and believe you me, and I always say, picture the day after the breach, right? In this case, it was 6 months. Hey, it would have been a no-brainer. Go ahead and turn that on. So I'll leave it there. One other thing that was interesting too, this coincided with COVID. So changes were made in the way that things were accessed from the office versus home. And guess what? There was a VPN from the office to AWS, but there was no VPN. But the first vector was through someone's poorly secured personal GitHub, because they were linked to the company GitHub, which means that their personal account had access to the company code.
That'll do it.
Kirk, would it be fair to say that part of your job and your role is also helping people actually understand what strategy even means, and then also helping people navigate that individual like change curve? Because that's what you're saying, like, to you, me, everybody on this call, we totally, obviously you want SSO and GitHub, and also why the hell you have your developers on personal machines, downloading company info. But I can easily see a VP of engineering not getting it and having to be taken on like a journey to essentially almost be educated.
It was interesting, how you positioned your role. At this time, the company didn't have a chief information security officer. They had a one person who was the security kind of program manager of the whole company. And he frankly, his voice wasn't as loud. He tried, but it wasn't. And so it was interesting when you look at it, because you realize, there were a lot of things, and I don't know how to solve that always. It's hard. This is the challenge of this, right? So we talked about risk. Cybersecurity, I'm a California native, been here my whole life. We know earthquakes happen. How many of us who've even lived through some significant ones are ready, right? Because it's just easier to deal with that tomorrow. And I think cybersecurity, and all of us have to be these voices in the organization without overselling it, but we have to say, hey, these are real risks, and we need to. And at times, you only got so much political capital, right? But at some times you have to say, nope, you can't ignore this. We must take this. And again, and I think Flea mentioned it, in this case, the VP of development really did have the call. And I was over corporate IT, so I can't, I know to have everything tied. In our case, we had Okta, right? It's tied to Okta. So these are the things that I think are the realities that you may even know what to do, but you have to be smart about how you execute that. Because again, organizations can only change so fast, and the right influencers have to support that. So driving cybersecurity and IT, but cybersecurity programs requires influence, and kind of you have to be smart about how you execute. Otherwise, it'll go nowhere.
So Kirk, I know one of the things you're talking about with strategy that I've heard, and I've found that with, kind of non-security people that have already kind of drunk the Kool-Aid, when you're trying to change that culture or just show off why that strategy is important, it's just the power of storytelling. And I know it's probably not the best, but I think, hey, when there is an Okta or when there is, a breach, of saying, hey, listen, it's unfortunate that it's happened to this company, but hey, there were simple things that could have been done that, hey, if we put this in place, we don't have to be in the news next. Have you found like that has helped when you kind of take it? Because I feel sometimes, security, we need more security, and some people just don't get it. But when they see like a story of like this really happened to a real company that could be us, does that help them at all, or how do stories kind of help at all, if any?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And when I was working with Chevron for many years, it was always, well, what is Exxon doing? What happened to Shell? Right? So oftentimes companies will look at their competitors and fast follow. I mean, if they have breach, then the other companies, believe you me, are like, we should invest in that today. And so I think, those of us that are trying to move organizations, you have to be sensitive to when the wind is ready, when the companies are ready to move. And again, going back to the reality, every large tech provider that we know of has had major breaches that have been publicized. So, I think that's just the reality. It's not even a capital thing. It's, it's not skill. It's just the reality. So we haven't talked about it here, but one is what we call a risk registry. Mm-hmm. So we actually go through a process and say, what are the company's top risks? We go to each of the departments and say, okay, finance, what are your risks? And ideally, not just so-called cybersecurity risks, but all the risks, right? Mm-hmm. Because more and more, this is all the risk is risk. Mm-hmm. So part of the strategy then is when you take, that's part of assessment. So you say, okay, here are all of our enterprise risks. And some of those will be data related and some of, and then we say, okay, where each of those risks, how are they assessed today? And then what steps can we take? Goes back to how much change. What can we mitigate that risk 50% or 25%? And then those become the projects that are on the slate or the roadmap for the next 18 months. Those projects that mitigate risk. Now, you hope that once you sell those in the org, that the support stays and the funding to see it to the end of the project. But those are the kind of things that we're trying to do to move, because I think, and I'd love to hear from Flea and Devin on this, but we're always trying to move the organization from one state of kind of risk resilience to a higher state, because it's just a never-ending thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the I think it's CMMI, maturity management of initial all the way to optimized.
Right.
And I did also want to toss in as well. You're 100% right. Security is a lifestyle, right? It's like fitness. It's something you adopt and you practice forever. Right. And with regards to actually also sharing those stories, like one of the pieces of advice I give to every person who wants to be a CISO, or to say like, hey, Flea, I'm a new CISO, I'm trying to make board decks, I always include industry stories of other breaches and how it relates to our company. Because that's actually one of the most powerful things you can do. And it's actually one of the most powerful audiences you'd actually have that conversation at. Because you can actually say like, hey, Twitter just got popped. Okay, well, Reddit is kind of a social media company. Full disclosure, we call ourselves a social media platform. We're not, but Reddit is a social media company. So what does that mean for Reddit? Hey, are we doing things that are similar to Twitter? Most likely, at least some stuff. So we're probably in that same bucket for a potential attacker. And I've used this at so many companies, and it is so powerful. And I encourage every team to do that. And there are tons of teams that during the just send up just general like threat awareness things. And I encourage you to just like, hey, at least once a month, send your entire company, here's what's going on in the ecosystem. It actually turns out that people think what we do is actually kind of cool. And they actually are interested in hearing about, hey, what really happened at Okta? How does that actually work? What does it actually mean for me and my little company? So I love that advice, Kirk, and I just want to double down on it.
I don't want to break the conversation up, but I want to get to some of these other questions because I know you guys are going to keep on geeking out about this. So I wanted to talk about AI real fast. Have you guys noticed or have you seen anything? And I'm looking at Fleas laughing. Do you expect breaches to increase, to be amplified now that AI is a thing? AI models. What's your thoughts around AI in cybersecurity?
And I'm one of those annoying pedantic people, and I'm assuming when you talk about AI, you're talking explicitly about LLMs.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Generative LLMs. Yes.
I personally, and people are shocked with this. I'm not worried about it from a security standpoint, or at least introducing new risk. Because the reality is actually a couple of things. Like one, at least at the stage that we're in right now, LLMs don't have good reasoning capability. Now, there's some interesting things you can actually do with agents. And if you're a very sophisticated attacker, AI might make you a little bit more productive, but I don't think it's going to be a game changer. And what I mean by that, it's like there's some interesting things you can actually get an LLM to do, to actually do some fuzzing, do reversing even, find vulnerabilities in code. But even that is not so great, not at the level of a really experienced human. But it can make you scale as an attacker. Now, if you're a very talented attacker, AI is a great benefit. But I think for most common day-to-day people, it's not going to change that much. And part of the reason it's not going to change that much is here's the sad reality. Most folks get popped by a vulnerability that is over 90 days old, that needs no context. It is already in Metasploit. It already has write-ups on Pastebin. It already has write-ups on other places, in the Onion network, et cetera. And it's just common knowledge. So AI doesn't change that much because where people are isn't even attractive for somebody who wants to spend a bunch of money. Why would you pay a ton of money to do something with an LLM, et cetera? We can actually just load up, your latest kit in Metasploit. Obviously I'm old, sorry for talking about Metasploit, but you're gonna load up whatever is there recently. And Kali Linux is always gonna have new stuff in the toolkit. And all of those kind of like commodity attacks are always going to be there, and they are already working at scale, right? So anybody who has a home router, they're going to see all the scans now if they actually look at their network traffic. If you're in your company, you're obviously part of our problem as cybersecurity professionals is the amount of noise and the amount of attacks. And AI is not going to increase that because that low-hanging fruit is so attractive, so easy that AI can't do better than what attackers are already doing today that are being successful.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Flea. I think it can refine what people are already doing. I think it can refine a phishing attack, and it can refine a malware or ransomware. But all of these issues are already a top issue. AI will just refine it. I will say that also what Flea is saying, the reason I think why Kirk is one of the reasons why I think Kirk will probably never be unemployed is from a strategy perspective. Everyone wants to go to AI. They want to go to the sexy, hey, how can I get AI driven security? When really a lot of it is do we have the basic cybersecurity hygiene as far as from a strategy of moving from, one stage to another? A lot of companies say, hey, can we just get the initial cybersecurity hygiene list? That people I don't think people understand who don't work in this industry that if you just get the basic cybersecurity hygiene, that will protect you from probably 70 to 80% of a lot of cybersecurity vulnerabilities out there. Yes, there's the 80 to 100%. Those are kind of your advanced hackers, maybe your nation state threat actors, which honestly, unless like you're going to need help for those individuals. But the regular, most businesses, if you get that 80% cybersecurity hygiene, this really won't affect you. To Flea's point, I would agree with that to some degree.
One thing I would add is the technology that we refer to as AI or chat GPT, as an example, is moving at a fantastically rapid speed. So it's going to be fascinating to see what even 12 to 18 months looks like, let alone 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
One of the areas that's interesting, and I just learned about this regarding Microsoft and ChatGPT this weekend at the National Society of Black Engineers event, is that the Microsoft Copilot protects the company data. This was really interesting. So one element of cybersecurity, not so much on the attack side, but protecting company data that is an issue with this is if you use ChatGPT and I upload, let's say, a volume of data, that data, as I understand it, goes into the model, building the model, and maybe even can be output by another user who queries it. And I don't know all the specifics to GPT's implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Microsoft is saying, okay, if you use Copilot, that data is segmented and you can then build AI workflows that will not compromise your data and use it for training, which is critical for organizations. So I think it is going to be interesting as we see these things evolve, because who knows what it might mean for your data to be consumed in one of these models. And then how do you protect? And there's a lot of question right now as to who owns even the output of the data today.
Right.
If you have an image of a Ralph Lauren shirt and the polo image isn't just right, is that some kind of trademark infringement? What is it? So I think it's going to be interesting as we evolve to even try to ascertain ownership of the things that come out of these tools, but also for the data of the folks putting information in. What if you have the best recipe for chocolate chip cookies? Is that just free, because somebody pulls it out of ChatGPT or one of these tools? So I think that's going to be another element of this, of security. How do you protect the data but still utilize this technology?
Love it. Love that.
Where I am seeing security teams pay attention to LLMs, exactly what you're talking about, Kirk. It's like, hey, what are we doing with our data?
Yeah.
And who potentially might have it?
Mm-hmm.
And the GitHub example is actually a good one. And this is an area, like I have a Kubernetes cluster at home. I have a bunch of LLMs all running in it, et cetera. But one of the great things that Copilot does is it has this essentially what it calls this context window, and it just dumps all your code in that. So it never, you don't have to worry about kind of like that cross contamination that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I wanted to ask too about so another critical thing that came up in some of the questions that was submitted was questions surrounding IoT and security. Everything is basically becoming Internet of Things, right? You have your refrigerators now have systems within them. What are your thoughts, or maybe talk a little bit about any concerns that you guys might have surrounding security and IoT in the next, say, 24 months or so?
I guess my concern, I think, with IoT is that a lot of times people don't realize that the smaller the technology or the device, the less that I think security can be thought of. Like if we have, a regular, I guess, technology device, a laptop, security can be built into that from design and thought of. But a lot of these IoT devices, let's just say an Apple Watch or something like that. It's so small, or maybe not an Apple Watch. I would say maybe like a thermometer or something like that, like a home thermometer. The security on there, it's so small that the security protections in order for the IoT device to work, it's not to the standard. So it can easily be abused by an attacker. You can have a denial of service attack just because of as an IoT. Most of that is just trying to connect with other IoT devices, and security may not have been as forefront in that conversation as we would have liked.
One thing I'll add is I think of IoT like the internet of sensors. So IoT is more than sensors, but pretty much it's about sensors. And if you think about even the rooms that we sit in right now, can you count all the microphones? Right. Just thinking about the reality that sensors are everywhere, cameras are everywhere. And securing these devices, as Devin points out, is not trivial at all. And some of the more famous breaches are, I think Flea mentioned it, just simply unpatched low-grade cameras are used as bots to send signals because they've been taken over in mass, because, you know, you can find a low-priced camera, plug it in, and it's on the internet. And frankly, you know, who's going to go around their house maybe and update the security on a wireless camera? You know, you just may not get around to it and not realize. So I think this is a real challenge, because won't we be immersed? I mean, isn't IoT really just meaning a complete immersion of sensors? And so from a freedom and kind of individuality perspective, there's interesting challenges and dilemmas. But it's fascinating that IoT to me is just a whole mesh network of sensors.
It is so crazy. And of the things I'm worried about, IoT is actually one of the bigger ones. And now there's so many actually reasons why. There's so many things that I think people don't even realize. One of the things is actually the end user aspect of it. So like for me, my house is a hellscape to live in if you're not an IT professional, because it is VLAN, yes, right? There's all kinds of different networks. It's segmented as one would think a CISO might have. Most people can't and shouldn't do that, right? However, they have these devices that are now connected in their home network that they're not even aware of. And some of them actually have intelligence that they're not aware of. So on my desk, I have way too many of these. But what you see in my hand here is an ESP32 chip. This actually has Bluetooth and wireless built into it. It is programmable by default. You actually first put some of the firmware on it. It actually also has an open web service, and it actually upload additional firmware. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. I'm from Mississippi, so I like barbecue. I have a smoker outside. That smoker has this chip in it.
Really?
Yeah. There are far more things in your house, and I could probably actually go through and scan your house, and I'm going to find literally ESP32s, and I know exactly how to program it. I know exactly how to put them on it, and you would never notice it. Now, we're just now getting to companies that are actually working and dealing with this. And in this particular chip, this is a shout out and a plug for a Black woman-owned cybersecurity startup. It's actually phenomenal. It's called Thistle. It's actually by Wendell Snyder. She's also ex-Microsoft, ex-@stake. Please check her out. Give her some love. But it is such an important thing, because even more so, most people don't even know they have things like this. They're getting this, and it's in their light bulbs, for example. And things that we didn't think were as capable are actually far more capable. And one of the issues is that, well, if you're mass producing these are now dirt cheap. So why wouldn't you, as a manufacturer, put in something like this as opposed to something even more simple that's less capability? So people are opting to actually do the things that have more capabilities, and it's actually far scarier. And they're giving zero protection to end users. They're giving zero education to end users. And those end users aren't just like us civilians at home. These things are showing up in corporations. They're showing up in all kinds of places, et cetera. So somebody asked us, security experts, how do you protect yourself at home? I'm from Mississippi. I still believe in guns, and I'm old, and I live. So that's how I protect my home.
Well, again, I would say, because go ahead.
I was just going to remind everybody, if you're listening on YouTube, click the like and share, subscribe, please, on both my Black WPT YouTube and also on Devin's podcast. What is it called again, Devin?
Talking Tech Podcast. I think it's in
Talking Tech Podcast. Please click on the like, share, and also subscribe. Go ahead, Devin. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, I would just say I always try to take it from someone who's a security person. If you have multi-factor authentication, please use it. Like that's I always try to go basic of, if you have an app on your phone, if there is any way to increase the security without you, I would say that I know it's a little annoying when you're trying to log in or authenticate,
yes.
but I always tell people, if it's annoying for you, it will be annoying for an attacker. Just take, I think Kirk's example, the day after, if I had just done that, it's annoying, but I promise you, that's one of the easiest things you can do to protect yourself.
I think Kirk did the best job of explaining that concept of like attack cost. and how you as a professional want to say, like, okay, well, hey, as an attacker, you want that cost to be, well, as a defender, I want to make that cost extremely high, right? And like as an attacker, I'm only interested in things where the cost is low. So that whole MFA thing, and also shout outs for password managers, which now come in like all varieties. And the Apple password manager is great. What's in Chrome is great. I recommend any of those. So.
Yeah.
I did have I want to ask a question. This is one that came in. Actually, this was it came in I think yesterday. This was surrounding startups. Let me see. It says, speaking specifically to the roles of senior and executive professionals in security, what type of protocols and detection systems would you advise for startups building for scale?
Oh, so there's like a couple of easy ones. Like one, single sign-on. And it's just so cheap and easy. And if you can start that day one, your life is just going to be better. And it is available at so many different ways. And if you cannot afford Okta, go out and download KeyCloak, and you can just build your own. But just having single sign-on just gets you so much in and of itself, and actually makes your employees' lives better and makes them more productive. The other that I always advise to people as well, on top of that, is pick a secure platform. There are better options, and no offense, Devin. Like, I generally don't recommend people to like give their employees Windows machines, and part of that is because, okay, this is actually just a broader attack surface, and it's actually a little bit more mature from a weaponization standpoint, etc. That's still okay, because now Microsoft also has Windows Defender, and it has BitLocker, has those other things actually built into it. So if people are going to choose it, you also just make sure that they enable all of the great security features already in their platform, right? So that's the other one. And this might make Devin happy or might make sad. It sounds boring, but it is literally one of the most important and one of the most powerful things you can do: asset management, and just understanding what you actually own and what you see. And as a complete sidebar, if y'all are not aware, TPMs in cybersecurity are literally some of the most valuable employees that you can ever actually have. I've never actually worked with Devin. I'm sure he's actually a rock star, and now later I'm going to try to steal him. But it actually is a role for people to actually think about actually making that shift into cybersecurity. It is a great and extremely powerful role. But going back to the startup question, the other thing I also try to recommend people is, if they are a startup, in general, people think of startups as a technology company building something, deploying something, etc. Pick a good platform that also has good security features and defaults for shipping. So that does mean, like, hey, AWS is actually very, very secure now at this point. And in fact, like, you get a lot for free just by being on AWS or even Azure or GCP, etc. I would normally stick to those big three. So the folks that are kind of doing the whole DigitalOcean thing or the Heroku thing, or God bless you, the folks that are actually still in data centers and colos, they're just not going to have the same as what some of these other people can actually do. The other is on the startup side, if you're actually writing code. Now, full disclosure, I guess I'm technically a world expert in static analysis. I do not recommend people actually look at static analysis. Instead, I tell people, have your developers focus on using something like Dependabot, Renovate.
Yes.
You can use Sneak if you just like burning money and getting zero value, but Sneak at least is in that category. But these are all these things that are all around third-party dependency management. And a good portion of the time, the things that actually come up as actually issues in your product, you're going to have a handful of things that are just like, oh yeah, we actually made some coding mistakes. Oftentimes it's going to be things that actually come out of the ecosystem. And then probably two more things. The other on the development standpoint is actually pick good development languages and frameworks. I am a kid that grew up with assembly in C. I love C. I still write it myself. But there are few companies that should ever have C in there anyway, right? And they should be pushing more and more and actually using some of these frameworks. So, hey, if you're a Python shop, use Django. Django has a lot of defenses built into it. If you're a Java shop, use Spring, because Spring has a lot of defenses already built into it. Never use PHP because it's a hot mess. It's a horrible, horrible thing. But like, there are languages that you pick that actually are going to give you a leg up. And then finally, the culture. The culture is one of the most important things. Literally make sure that every single person joining your startup understands how critical and important it is to get security right, or at least attempt to get security right. And that is also important to actually just have that mindset inside the company, because, at some point they're going to call Kirk. Now, the conversation is like, hey, do you want to pay Kirk a lot of money or just a little bit of money? Now, Kirk, he's my generation, he's my people. I want Kirk to get paid a lot of money, but ideally the company has already built things up so that at least when Kirk is showing up, it's like a 2 to 4 week engagement, as opposed to, Kirk showing up and go like, oh my God, I got to move in here and I got to live with y'all for 6 months.
One thing I would add, that small companies and large, when worker A joins, how long does it take for them to get up to speed? Mm-hmm. And more importantly, when worker A leaves, are we sure that they don't have access to any company information? That's not a trivial question to answer. And if you don't have the right tools, you cannot answer that question. So single sign-on, and I believe the Microsoft tool now called Entra was Active Directory, Okta's tools. What you ideally want to do is have all the company resources that are, external to the company. Like we're talking about NetSuite, maybe is your ERP. Well, if you connect it to single sign-on, when employee A joins, you can onboard them pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, when employee A leaves, you can be sure they don't have access to these resources. And that is not cheap. Many of the companies require an additional fee, but particularly for startups that are probably going to have turnover, lots of folks coming and going, you'd be surprised how much. I would say there's probably, I don't know how many companies can say definitively that ex-employees do not have access to company resources. And one way to do that is with single sign-on.
Yeah, I think if I were to nail it down, if I was a startup today, I'd want to go with the security, solution protocol that's robust, it's scalable, and it's cost effective. Something that you can start. I think kind of Fleet and Kirk have said it. Something that you can start with as a security foundation, and as your startup grows, that can grow alongside you. You don't want to, I guess, hitch your wagon to something that as you grow, you're going to have to leave behind, because then that's going to cost you more money. And again, you're going to have to bring in guys like Kirk who would tell you this anyway.
I love it. Love it. We got about 10 minutes, a little bit over 10 minutes. I wanted to switch gears just a little bit because we had a lot of folks who are intrigued about the cybersecurity career field. So number one, there's a couple questions that are here, but I want to get from you all, at least hear from you all. Why do you think cybersecurity is hot right now? Like it's a buzzword, like literally everywhere.
Oh, there are so many reasons. Like one is that the regulation is actually turned up, right? So as a company, if you're a public company, there is significant scrutiny on you. I like the color orange, but I do not want to have an orange jumpsuit, and there are real penalties now, right? Yeah. And so that's actually one of the things. The other is that we are now recognizing that this is the new battlefront, right? So when we're out here talking about people going, so Ukraine is at war, but there is a much bigger war happening around Ukraine, and there's a lot more players involved in it. And so there's a lot more appetite for actually bringing more people in, getting them in. And it's also been a drain from the private sector, because you have people who are like, hey, I came up in the military, got all this training, and I actually like to fight at that scale instead of, because, for the most part, we're all playing baby games. We're not playing the same game that the people in the Air Force, the NSA, et cetera, are playing. They get to play a real game. A lot more fun. And so you have a lot of people actually going back to that. And so that's actually dramatically changing that. So there's the aspect of our internal regulations here, as well as the changing just war landscape across the globe. So, at one period, we were super excited about America developing, just massive air superiority. Now the game is also getting cyber superiority. Yep. And we're seeing it actually play out in real time. And then probably the third, and this might actually sound like somewhat of a shock, there's a ton of companies that are actually now recognizing that security is a revenue generator. And it is making, like, Apple is just like a baby example of that, but at a massive, massive scale. So Apple was able to actually differentiate themselves because of their security story, and it also allowed them to actually do more and to ship things that other companies didn't. At Square, I essentially at Square had an infinite budget. And the reason why I had an infinite budget at Square is that the security team at Square is a large portion of Square's revenue. We designed a good chunk of the hardware. If you use Square's crypto app, that was almost 100% my team's code. We wrote most of the Bitcoin infrastructure, et cetera, because actually it turns out the security professionals have a skill set and a ability to actually look at a business landscape actually differently than a lot of other people, because the nature of our job actually requires us to look at a business holistically, and that also allows us to actually see other potential business opportunities that other people didn't. Here's a classic case of a company that is 100% enabled because of security work. PayPal. I'm old enough to remember when PayPal came out, and I'm old enough to remember what the internet was like before PayPal. And the reason why PayPal could exist is because they were able to actually build the security that could give people the trust to enable that business. And this is actually something that is useful for every security professional to know and to communicate to their business, which is that security is not just a cost center. Now, it could be a cost center if the business makes it that, but security, massive, massive, massive revenue generator. So you think about when Kirk shows up as a strategist and helping you think through things, he's like, Kirk's going to show up and say like, hey, have y'all thought about maybe actually thinking about getting an ISO 27001? Because Kirk knows what that, like, hey, you need to do some of this stuff anyway, but if you get that certification, now all of Europe is open to your salespeople.
Yep.
Right. Oh, you got a SOC too? Oh, now every Silicon Valley company is open to you for business. Oh, holy shit. You got, sorry, I know it's extreme. You got FedRAMP? Okay, you got FedRAMP. You got guaranteed money for the rest of your life. You never have to actually do anything anymore. And it's such a powerful thing that actually security teams can do. And that's actually part of the reason why it's heating up, because more and more businesses actually seeing it and recognizing it as a competitive advantage.
I agree with all of that. I would say I'm going to take it from I guess people entering or people being interested. I feel like a lot of what happened during COVID, I think work was kind of interrupted. A lot of people, I think there was this great resignation, great reshuffling, however they called it. I think a lot of people finally had a chance to really think about, hey, I'm doing this line of work. And maybe, this isn't really what I wanted to do. And I finally kind of had a break to think about it. And I think during that time, as Flea has said, cybersecurity has really picked up a lot of word of mouth. And I think people have started to make that decision of, hey, let me go try this. I've listened to so many, podcasts or interviews of school teachers, nurses, people in the music or arts saying, hey, I'm hearing about cybersecurity, want to make a change in my life, and, went ahead and made that happen. So that's in addition to what Flea said, that's my thing. It's just COVID really has made people think.
Love it.
One thing I'll add is, so I've been working with IT for my whole career. And before, security was just IT, so just getting things connected. And then that became a commodity. I mean, right now, you're not going to outpace your competitors because you have computers. There was a time when that was the case, and the faster the computers and this and that. Now you're going to outpace your competitors by living longer than them, if you will. But I have a question that we could all think of for all of us. I thought about this, and I'm going to put a company out there, but I was like, which companies' e-commerce do I trust the most? And, and it kind of came to me pretty quick. In my case, I actually do like Apple. I think Apple's is fantastic. But Amazon came to mind.
That's it. That was mine. That was mine.
They're rock solid, and they literally know every credit card I've had since, and have the boldness to show it to me, right? I don't even have the credit. But it's interesting how we can nod our heads and look at the business. I'm obviously it wasn't just that engine, but by taking the question of transactions kind of out of the consumer's mind, that's made a lot of money for them. And one thing I don't worry about is when I make a transaction with Amazon, is it going to be breached?
Right.
Even though knowing all that I know, they just have really slam dunk won that. And I think that's a good example. And I think Apple's another one that, their e-commerce platform, which is not trivial, to be able to buy something here and pick it up in one place and across the world. They have a very, very intense. So you can see that, depending on your company's strategy, you might spend more money in security and commerce, but it can really win because let's say Amazon has a few major breaches, at a certain time in their growth, it might have been enough to put them under, or Apple, for instance. So I agree. I think there is a place on the revenue side. And frankly, big companies are not big companies. Mature security companies only want to deal with mature security companies.
Yeah.
So if you don't raise your game, you're not going to be able to do business with the major players because they're not going to risk lowering their security, or even worse, some of their data gets. Well, that's what happened with Sony, right? But maybe we don't know. I don't know what Sony's security level were, but clearly, I think it was the partners where the film got stolen. Bottom line is the whole chain has to be at some level of consistency. So that's another revenue element there. You can't even really, and I think we can all agree that the cybersecurity environment we're heading to over the next 18 to 24 months is going to be arguably more difficult than it is now, just because the tools are increasing at ridiculous levels. Not to mention computing power. There are some people who believe that quantum computing is on the horizon, and for those of us that are into crypto, that might change some of the things in crypto. I'm sure Flea has some opinions on that.
I do have opinions on that, because you're talking about cryptocurrency, which even though I work on a cryptocurrency product, I don't care about. So I hope they crash all at once. But in actual cryptography, and this is actually where those security teams actually come into play as revenue generated, because we now actually have some quantum proof crypto operations now.
Really? Good for you.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
At least hypothetically, because obviously we have to actually see what actually happens when people are actually adding more qubits, et cetera, the whole nine, and the quantum computers themselves actually get more powerful. But we believe that there is an algorithm that actually will work, and it's going to change the game once again. But I think, Kirk, you hit on something else is also super important, which is just the proliferation of compute. Like all the things you now have actually is a fully formed Turing machine, and is much more powerful than probably even the laptop you had 10 years ago. And then the other aspect is the ubiquity of bandwidth. And this changes so many things. Like the fact that pretty much everybody has 5G, and that 5G in and of itself can give you now 200, megabits per second. Now, as an attacker, things that weren't attractive to me are now attractive. Your car is now attractive to me. It's something I couldn't get access to, and now it's everywhere, right? Like I got my little flipper here, so I can go and get out all you Tesla kids, and it's that kind of thing. But now those things are actually at a much different level, and that is definitely changing things, and it's causing companies to say, "Hey, you ever heard about this thing called cybersecurity? Oh, you heard about it? Hey, you want to come work at my company?" Because they are now recognizing how important it is to their bottom line in a way that it just wasn't before.
We're running out of time, but I want to ask this last question. I think I was on cyberseek.com. It's a website, a bunch of analytics surrounding cybersecurity, and just a lot of fantastic info. Last year, there was 770,000 cybersecurity jobs, and that is down significantly to about like 400,000. Earlier, I think, Flea, you touched on some of the certifications and certificates you can get, trainings and so on. How important are certificates for someone who is crossing over, say, from developer to the cybersecurity field?
Yeah, if you're a developer, don't even bother with a certificate. You can get hired today as a cybersecurity engineer and probably at least get 10 to 20% higher salary than what you're making today.
That's correct.
With nothing else, just from the fact that, hey, I know how to program, and I'm interested in being on the security team.
Yeah, they can train you as far as just as I said, if you're a developer, they can train you as far as security. It's so much harder to train a security professional how to code versus the other way around.
Yeah, and it's like the easiest and quickest way to get a significant pay bump. And if you work in a tech company, just go and say, "Hey, security team, I want to be on your team," and they will
love you. They'll love you.
Here's your pay raise. That's literally it.
Wow. All right, devs, if y'all tired of developing,
no, seriously, they will love you. Security people. Those honestly, if I could work with anyone at my level, a developer that's interested in security, oh my goodness, that's a gift.
Wow, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Wow, great. Let me jump through the comments really quick and see if there's any questions in here.
We'll say, if you're looking through the questions on the certificates themselves, they actually are valuable. Like I don't have any certifications. I came up the old school way. I didn't go to jail, and then somebody decided, okay, we didn't send you to jail, so now you're working in this department. The certifications can give you such a leg up, especially for just like early career, right? And you're just actually, making a transition, and in particular, making a transition that maybe wasn't from development. Saying like, hey, you know what? I'm this awesome, corporate IT person. I've been doing this stuff forever. I actually have been doing security. You just may not recognize it because at the end of the day, corporate IT is essentially like 80% of security. And it's like getting one of those things like CompTIA. Like that opens that door for you to actually do the work you already know how to do. And sometimes people do need to see that. And what I've also experienced, and please, Devin and Kirk chime in, especially at some of the larger companies where there's a lot more formality and a lot more things around like, hey, no, but they're there for good reason, because a lot of the formality is to make sure that everybody's getting an even chance, right?
Yeah.
But if they just say like, hey, here's the bar, everybody has a certification, it's the thing that actually helps you get your foot in the door. And one of the things I would advise people against is paying a lot of money for certifications, and even more so paying money and significant money for these certification training courses.
Okay.
People are valuable, and every single thing that they offer is on YouTube. It is on YouTube today.
Wow, that's crazy.
And it is often way more complete, and it is more up to date than things that you're generally paying hundreds and, unfortunately, in some cases, thousands and thousands of dollars to get training for.
Devin, what about program management? How would someone sort of try and gravitate towards that?
So from a cybersecurity perspective,
cybersecurity, yeah.
So I would say for that, if you are naturally trying to gravitate toward that, and let's just say you already have project management or program management experience, I would do exactly what Flea has said. Get you a Security Plus from CompTIA. Again, if you're, first of all, you should never be spending thousands of dollars. That's crazy. Get you, a Security Plus that just shows that you have a basic fundamental understanding of cybersecurity concept. You pair that with your project management or your program management experience. You can put yourself in position to vie for a cybersecurity project manager or program management field, because that's honestly the combination of what you're dealing with. Do you know security, and do you know how to manage a project or manage a program?
And then Kirk, from a consulting standpoint, how would someone
certificates have been good to me.
And it's required in your industry.
They are. But I'll tell you one of the things. So for instance, early in my career, I got some certificates around Microsoft and some other companies like Novell. And what they do is they give you the comprehensive knowledge that the producer of the product expects experts to know.
Yeah.
So now you can speak with a confidence at a certain level, right? They say, okay, so I know what level knowledge I have, and I can say it works like this. I think if you're going to enter this industry, you have to decide you're in a continual learning mode.
Absolutely.
And some of the biggest vendors have free training. Microsoft has almost infinite at this point. And you can really, really train up on what they provided. And at the end of the day, yes, you want the certificates, but even that knowledge that's available free, for instance, we talked about Copilot. Well, on my list of things is to take the Microsoft training that's free on Copilot. Walk walk out of that and you now have a conversational knowledge plus some level of depth. And then if you spin up the tools and all that, you have even more. I mean, that's not all experience, but my point is, in this world, for cybersecurity, you're never not training. You're always learning something new. That's just the nature of this. So if I was someone looking at this, I would just dig in. I mean, there's literally no stop. Not to mention, I love LinkedIn Learning. There's some great stuff there. YouTube is infinite. So, this is, I would put it back on folks. If you really want to dive in here, and you can't, like you take Microsoft. I don't know what percentage of companies have Microsoft, but learn Microsoft 365, top to bottom, secure that. How many companies have Microsoft 365 and need to know how to manage it? So yes, and yes to, certificates. But I will say this is an important point, I think. IT is a very broad area. And so cybersecurity by definition is an expert area. So recognize that, don't be discouraged if you can't be an expert in cybersecurity, because you need this whole stack of information which folks have accumulated. I mean, I started my career in this area in 93. So networks and servers and all this. I mean, it's just, I've got to watch it grow before there was a web.
Right.
As soon as you said Nobel, I was like, oh, Kirk and I are the same age.
Right, we said the same age,
Kirk, you over here in Oakland?
Right, right. He said from Oakland. Right. Yeah. I live in Castro Valley. So,
Kirk's fancier than me.
But and so I think that, that's what, and particularly for student age folks, don't get intimidated. It's just a broad area. Yeah. Now, I can tell you some areas you can dive in deep, I think, there's areas of forensics where you dive in. This is not an area where I have a lot of expertise, but that's an area that's deep, vulnerability and hacking. Again, that's not my specific thing, but understanding, but how do you break a system? You have to understand the breadth of the system and depth. So if you like learning, I think this is one area that there's really no limit. You can learn as much as you can, and it's immediately applicable. Because every company, all these organizations, they really do need to understand how to think about securing data and processes. And you can start with any organization, from nonprofits that are in your neighborhood. In fact, the nonprofits probably need the help the most.
Yeah. That's a really good way to actually get on paper experience and actual quote unquote professional recommendations and endorsement is go and I'm not trying to proselytize, but go if you do have a church family, if you go to church, go talk to your church. Yeah. Because they probably now at this point actually have some IT infrastructure, and you can actually say, hey, I'm going to help you secure that. I know the reverend's getting all these ties, so he can go and buy expensive stuff he shouldn't be buying. And so, hey, we need to, control that. But it is an area. If you have kids in school, go and volunteer at that school, right? Because they do not have enough IT people, and that actually gets you. And those are things that I would recognize on a resume. Like, it doesn't have to be that, hey, I worked at yada yada yada, and they paid me a ton of money. The interesting thing about you as a person is going to be the experience you had, not how much you were paid to get that experience or actually doing that experience. I have one plug for people that are maybe on the blue team side or just more on the technical side. Learn Kubernetes. It's no longer optional. So go out, if you are on Linux or on Mac, go K3S, it's from Rancher, the CiSO group. Or if you're on Windows, go check out Minikube. And in fact, Minikube is going to run all of those platforms. And if you're not familiar with some of how these things work, there's actually a great YouTube series. There's a great guy named Techno Tim. He's actually a really good person to actually look if you're actually just getting into some of that stuff. There's another young lady, I think she's from the Czech Republic. It's like Yana with Tech or something like that. She has a phenomenal series that can walk somebody from, hey, I only know how to type on the keyboard to, hey, I can deploy things in Kubernetes. I can tune things in Kubernetes. I understand how containers work. I understand how this cloud networking stuff works. And it will make a massive difference in your career. And it's like it's table stakes now.
So that's so much info. My goodness. Any final? We're way over, by the way. we're over, but I'm gonna let you guys get some final thoughts. Any shameless plug? You guys want to share your websites? Any contact info you want to share? You might as well.
Yes,
we're already over anyway. So.
I have a website. It is called reddit.com. And full
shameless plug.
We are hiring. I want to make a shameless plug for the people in the audience, especially the ones who are actually asking some of these questions. And one of the things that I love to remind people of is whatever your background is, there is a cybersecurity job for you and your skill sets today in cybersecurity. And I think oftentimes people forget about how broad and wide, like, ranging the field is. If you're like, hey, I'm a technical writer, we need technical writers in cybersecurity.
Gotcha.
You're like, hey, I'm really good at actually thinking about processes and things like that. It's like, hey, we have people that actually work in GRC. Hey, I have a legal background.
That's the sleeper.
GRC.
That's the sleeper one.
Yeah, it's like, I'm really good at understanding humans. It's like, no, I totally want to get cybersecurity. Like, one of the best cybersecurity hires I made was a young lady that worked at the front desk of NetSuite.
No way.
And she was probably one of the most valuable cybersecurity hires I've ever made in my entire life.
Wow.
Her skill set was that she knew how to understand people and what their true motivations, what their desires were, and how to actually influence them. And how to get to a point where everybody wins, right? So it's like, hey, I got this stupid crazy thing I want to roll out. Like, hey, I want to do this crazy thing. I'm going to roll out security onion all the way out here in the Philippines. And you're going to have a bunch of people like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. But I could actually put her in front of them. And she's like, oh, no. Fling is an idiot, but this is exactly what he means. And here's how it's actually going to benefit you. Here's the things you actually get from it. And there's just so many things that, regardless of where you're coming from, like I said, there is a good role and a good actual career for you in cybersecurity. And I need more Black and brown people in cybersecurity. Yes, I need more women in cybersecurity. So please, people, if you're on this, go out, look for that cybersecurity job.
That is awesome.
Also, Reddit is hiring.
Yeah, I would say, it's cybersecurity is for everyone. I think there's probably an image that people have of somebody in a gray hoodie or a gray sweatshirt, like Flea kind of said. Well, I mean, again, other than, yes, we have people like that as well. But like, literally, there's a job for you, like, everywhere. Don't be. I think Kirk said it. Don't be intimidated. Yes, you have to kind of put a little bit of work, but if you love to learn, there's absolutely a place for you in the cybersecurity industry.
I love it. And Devin put his link to his podcast on YouTube. Definitely check it out. It's really, really good. Anything from you, Kirk, at all?
No, I've just enjoyed it. This has been great. If I was to say what are the three big areas of tech that probably are going to be not a miss, cybersecurity is going to be employing people for a while. It's going to change though, right? The tools are changing. So it's all about learning. But, as long as there's technology at this point, we're going to have to secure it. The other thing, obviously, is AI. AI is going to change things. And crypto, in my opinion, has got a big runway. And so I think, this is one of the big three, in my opinion, that is, we still got at least 20, 30 years of runway before somebody says there's no more worries of security. And we don't know. I mean, there's never been the case in the humanity that we're aware of. So I don't think it's going anywhere at all.
Kirk, I actually agree with you on the crypto. If you would expand it, because I think the key there is the decentralization of finance.
Right.
And that's not going away. That barn door is open,
that will
we
increase.
have to live with it and deal with it and figure it out.
Yep.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you guys for being here. I wanted to shameless plug my Facebook group, Black WPT. I also have one called Breaking into Tech. Look for both of those. I know a lot of you still use Facebook. Hopefully you do. We're also online, blackwpt.com. And follow our YouTube, we're also on X. I keep saying Twitter. We're on X. We're also on LinkedIn. Look for us on all of the social networks, even on, we're also sharing on threads now as well. So
Wait,
thank you guys.
are you on Reddit? Is there a subreddit?
No, we're not on Reddit.
Like we have a Nesby subreddit. Where's your subreddit?
Oh, that's nice.
We're gonna work on that. We're working on that. Okay, we're gonna work on that. Don't worry. But thank you guys so much. There's so much information, and I feel like we need to do another segment, like diving deep. But yeah, I just feel like I nerded out with all
this. Because some of you are actually here in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
We have an in-person just Reddit security event, open door. You can come check out the headquarters. If you know who Spez is, you can go tell Spez to whatever in person, etc. So yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Give me the details on that, and we definitely have a nice sized group here in the Bay Area for Black WPT, and anyone else who is listening in. This is an external chat, so not just our members are listening in; other folks are as well. So, thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us, Shauna.
Right.
Thank you very